Ladies and gentlemen, this is a tape recording of excerpts from two radio programs over radio station WOR, New York. The first group of excerpts will be from a broadcast made on August 26, 1962, a pre-broadcast before Albert K. Bender appeared on the program 1 week later, on September 1st, 1962. The second group of excerpts you will hear will be from the program on which Albert K. Bender appeared on September 1st, 1962. Remember that these are all highlights from the programs. The program ran about 5.5 hours, so you can see that it would take a great deal of listening time to hear it all. So we have endeavored to put on the best parts of these programs. The third part of the tape consists of excerpts from a lecture given by Albert K. Bender in New York City on October 27, 1962, to the New York Saucer Information Bureau. The lecture was held in the Henry George School of Social Sciences. Thank you.
The program with Dominic Lucchese, Augie Roberts, Jim Mosley on August the 26th, the morning of August the 26th, Long John Nebel Party Line program. Neighbors, this is Long John once again. We're around from midnight to 5 o'clock 5 mornings during the week, and of course on weekends we're around till 5. I've invited a group of gentlemen to be with me tonight. All of these men have been on the show, maybe as many as 15 or 20 times. Some of them maybe just a half a dozen times. I think it's the first time that we've had all four of them together at, at one single show, or for one single show, I should say. Augie Roberts. Mr. Roberts is a photographer. And I don't think that's really his claim to fame as far as the show is concerned, because Mr. Roberts has been interested in flying saucers and the occult, and he knows just about everybody in the field. And another gentleman by the name of Dominic Lucchese. Now, Mr. Lucchese is an electronics expert, but my interest in having him on the show is the fact that he is interested in many, many offbeat subjects. We've invited Stuart Robb to be with us. Mr. Robb is a very fine harpsichordist, and he is also interested in psychic phenomena. And then Mr. Mosley, James W. Mosley, who is the editor of Saucer News, which is the official publication of the Saucer and Unexplained Celestial Events Research Society. But I think to sort of get this rolling a little bit, you might tell us, Dominic, how you first became acquainted with Albert K. Bender.
Yes, John.
The fact that Bender was in existence first came to my attention through Mr. Roberts, Augie.
And Augie told me that there was a fellow in Bridgeport, Connecticut, who had begun an organization which was of a worldwide nature to collate and integrate various information in relation to phenomena such as flying saucers, which at the time was quite predominant in the limelight, we may say, in reference to that specific field at the time. Now, it seems that Augie had already been to Bender's once before, had met him personally, and had the occasion to speak to him. And Augie was ready to depart for Bridgeport on a Sunday, and asked me if I would be willing to go along with him and to meet Mr. Bender personally. At the time, Augie used to conduct a tremendous amount of correspondence relating to various phenomena, both in the flying saucer field and other related fields, we may say. So I agreed with Augie to take the trip to Bridgeport with him. Well, it so happens that we did take that trip on the following Sunday, and I did have the pleasure of meeting Mr. Bender, and I would like to make the statement that it certainly was a pleasure, because Mr. Bender is the type of person that anyone would like to meet, a real nice person, and extremely sincere individual. And certainly I feel, and I always have felt, and I still feel to this day, that Bender is a friend of mine, a close friend. I haven't seen Mr. Bender since the events that occurred in Bridgeport. But I must say that certainly the organization that Bender was the head of at the time certainly was receiving mail from all over the world: Australia, New Zealand, France, Paris, Italy. You name it, he was receiving mail from these various countries. And also was directly associated with other flying saucer information bureaus as a cooperative organizational deal. So certainly it was a pleasure to meet him, and it wasn't very long after we had met Mr. Bender that Bender construed the idea of creating what he called a special bureau of investigation. And what he was intended to do at the time was to select various individuals who were members of the organization and make them a specific investigatory leader in that their particular field. Gray Barker was to become the coordinator of this investigation group. And this group, if there was a saucer report received by Bender which had sufficient information, this report would eventually be processed through these so-called experts in the specific fields involved in their specialty, we might use that term. And each person would evaluate the particular sighting or series of events according to their knowledge. This worked very fine until, of course, the events that we don't know the exact events, but we might say the events that led up to the ultimate causation of the closing down of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, as the Bender's organization was called. Bender published a little book called Space Review, very nicely done, very neatly done, in a journalistic style. Very nice paper, and of a, we may say, relative small size, that it was convenient to carry the booklet or pamphlet, or what would you call it, in your coat pocket, or any way that was most desirable. In fact, this was similar to the various small magazines seen on the newsstand today. So Augie and I went up to see Mr. Bender quite a number of times, and always enjoyed our visits tremendously.
Well, let me just interrupt you for a moment, Dominic. About how many members did this organization have at the time?
John, to be honest with you, I could not give an accurate estimate. I could say that just on members I know personally, whose names I have come into contact with through my association with the International Flying Saucer Bureau, I could name about 50 just offhand, and I certainly only knew a mere handful. Maybe Mr. Roberts, Augie, would have some information that could clear up that matter to a more.
In other words, Augie brought you over to this fellow Bender's place. You had some interest, presumably, in flying saucers at the time. That's why Augie thought you'd be interested in meeting Bender and joining him, isn't it?
That's right, John. I did. I was extremely interested in any type of phenomena which at the time was unexplainable. And therefore...
You still have that interest today? Or is everything explainable to you today?
I still have an interest in various phenomena which is difficult to sort of...
No, I didn't mean in general. I mean as far as saucers.
No, I don't have any interest any longer, John.
In other words, you think that the whole thing was a farce?
No, I don't. I think that the phenomena had many answers, and I think that many people have come across the answers. I think, personally, this is my own personal opinion, that Mr. Bender did find out the necessary information to cause him to give up research because he had, I'd say, one of the answers.
And in other words, he gave it up because he was fearful of what might happen to him if he continued.
Well,
Are we led to believe that?
This is absolutely so, John, because according to Bender's own statement, the giving up of the International Flying Saucer Bureau was due to the appearance of three men dressed in dark suits who approached Mr. Bender one day. We don't know the exact day. I think we have pinpointed it to a relatively close degree. We can more or less say it was between a certain time and a certain time. I think Augie does have that information. But relating to the advent of the appearance of the three men with a very strange series of events which preceded this particular thing as far as we were concerned. This is looking at it from our point of view. I happened, Bender and I used to correspond with tape and by letter. Augie used to correspond with Bender in the same way, manner, and form. And occasionally we were prone to go to Bridgeport once a month or twice a month. And we had an appointment to go see Bender on a Sunday. This appointment was made 2 weeks previous to the time we did attempt the final, we may say, approach to Bender before he was silenced by the three unnamed visitors. But the way this did occur was that I went to Augie's house that Sunday afternoon. Augie had just purchased a new automobile at the time. And Augie was sort of anxious to try it out on a long trip. And up to that point, the automobile had acted wonderfully mechanically. But strangely enough, that one afternoon when we did try to get to Bender's, the engine overheated for no apparent cause or reason. I think it was on the Merritt Parkway. Had we arrived at the Merritt Parkway, do you recall, Augie?
I think it was, Dominic, it was somewhere around the Lincoln Tunnel, wasn't it?
No, we had already gone through Mount Vernon, Augie, if you recall, before we turned back. We were already on the New York side.
Well, anyway, at this point,
but anyway,
with a car. Is that it?
That's it, John. So what happened was that we got back to Augie's home, and Augie called Bender up to inform him that we would not be able to go to Bridgeport that day. This was only a matter of common courtesy on our part. And as Augie picked up the phone, I happened to be 3 feet away from him, and I saw Augie get sort of a startled look on his face as he was speaking to Bender. Because to come right to the point, Bender told Augie in very, very concise terms, I know what they are, and therefore there is no longer any reason to do any research on the matter. There have been very many strange things that have happened to me, and et cetera, et cetera.
This is Bender telling this to Augie.
Bender telling this to Augie
on the phone.
On the phone.
The day that you're on your way to Bridgeport.
Luckily enough, I presume, as far as the way Bender would look at it, we could not get to Bridgeport that day. Needless to say, we were extremely curious as to what Bender had found out. We felt that Bender did not want to speak over the phone, and that certainly when we did see him, we would also know whatever series of events had occurred to reveal the secret of the saucers to him. And Augie and I very, very anxiously awaited the time when we could make the trip to Bridgeport and try and resolve the many questions that Hal's statements had aroused in us. But I don't recall how many weeks we waited. Do you recall anymore, Augie, how many weeks we waited before we did go to see Bender? Was it the next week or the week after that?
I think it was the week after the car incident.
That's right. And do you recall the exact context of the phone conversation at the time, Augie?
Well, let me just identify the station here a moment. This is WOR Radio, your station in New York, 710 on your AM dial and 98.7 on your FM dial, an RKO general station. Rather than getting into that for a moment, if I may make this suggestion, Dominic. There's just a few questions to bring this up to date. At this particular time when you had this difficulty on the road with your car, and Augie went in to call him, and he said that it's all over. That is, Bender told Augie that it was all over. Did he say that some men had come to his home?
No, John.
Not at that time.
He did not give us any explanation as to what had happened. That's why I happened to ask Augie. I do not recall the exact words, but the words were to the effect that the flying saucer mystery is no longer a mystery. I have all the facts, and therefore, what's the use of going on? There have been many strange things happening in Bridgeport, etc., etc.
All right, now, considering all of these things for a moment, we all assume that Mr. Bender was afraid to talk about this. Certainly he didn't talk about it.
Not on the phone, John, no.
All right, and he didn't talk about it any other place, did he?
Later on he did.
He did?
Yes.
In other words, you knew all the facts?
No, we never did find out all the facts, John.
All you knew that 3 men came up.
Well, that was
In fact,
later
Gray-
on. At the
yeah.
time, we did not know it.
Even Gray Barker, in his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Gray didn't know all the facts about it either.
No, in fact, that very week I sent a tape to Gray explaining that something very strange had happened in Bridgeport, and to the effect that I had no way of resolving exactly what had happened without going to Bridgeport myself and speaking to Mr. Bender personally, which is what Augie and I did the following week.
All right, but as far as you fellas were concerned, the organization was going to be disbanded, right?
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
And was there any fear that you were aware of on his part?
Yes, I'd say there was fear in Bender's voice at the time.
During this phone call?
During the phone conversation, yes.
Now, I have some back copies of a publication known as Space Review, which was published, I don't know for how long it was published, but I have one dated April 1953. Incidentally, this is a copyright. This is copyrighted by Albert K Bender back in the year of 1953, and this is volume 2, number 2. And then I go to the last one in this group that I have in front of me of Space Reviews, if I can find it. It's, am I wrong? No. October 1953. Space Review, and it says on the top of this, above the masthead, this issue dedicated to August C. Roberts of Jersey City, New Jersey, for exceptional service to IFSB, which is International Flying Saucer Bureau. And then down in the lower right-hand corner of page 1 of this particular issue is the following statement, and I want to read this. And this statement is in quotes. So presumably, I don't know why they put it in quotes. I guess it's a statement on the part of the editor, and he put his own statement in quotes. The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we are sorry that we have been advised in the negative. End of quote. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. And then on the back page of this same issue dated October 1953, the issue that was dedicated to August C. Roberts, we have a notice to all subscriber members. And it says, since this is your last issue of Space Review, we wish your cooperation in reading carefully the following. And then it tells you how you can get a refund or back issues and so forth and so on. Now, in closing up this organization, this man came out with one more bulletin, right?
That's right, John.
He gives you a word of caution. I shouldn't say you, but gives the reader a word of caution with this sentence. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. Then we find that somebody else, a new organization, will be formed with Max Kringle as one of the directors. I'm reading this from this particular issue. We also find that in this final issue, after the 3 men in black came to Mr. Bender's home, he took the trouble, and I must say right to the bitter end, he was a good editor. He decided to bring to the attention of his subscribers, members, readers, what have you, about a saucer convention that would be held in Los Angeles. He also tells us about some new saucer groups, and then he has installment 2 of a story which I'm unfamiliar with by Lonzo Dove, who was the chief astronomer for IFSB. BFSB, which is International Flying Saucer Bureau, headed by this gentleman from Bridgeport, Connecticut. I would like to, if I forget to ask you, I know one of you gentlemen will be kind enough to remind me later, to tell me what were the duties of the chief astronomer of this group. And they had the second installment of the Mars explosions and the flying saucers. And then a news reporter from London, Judith L.G., spelled G-E-E, has an article titled Speaking of Flying Saucers. And then we have Frank Scully, who is a reporter for Variety, the theatrical publication. He has written Footnote to Flying Saucers. And then we have a special review of a book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, which first came out back in 1953 by Desmond Leslie and George Adamski. And then we have an editorial. And in this editorial, and I will just read the last sentence from our director, presumably our director in this particular instance was Mr. Bender. And he says, as a farewell note in his editorial, may I take this opportunity in saying farewell to all members and officers. Thank you all for the help and kind deeds you've given IFSB. A little before this closing word of thanks on the part of our editor and director, he tells us that the men in the saucers are much wiser than we think. Why should they destroy us when we will no doubt do it ourselves? Now, after reading these things and commenting on them, I would just like to ask either one of you, either Mr. Lucchesi or Mr. Roberts, if you can tell me how a man who is frightened to the extent by the appearance of three men in dark clothes, black clothes, or whatever colored garments they had on, that he decided to give the whole thing up, that he took all of the trouble to continue to put out this last publication instead of just a letter saying, men, it's all over. I packed it in, for any number of reasons. He's also gone to the extent of trying to clear up the financial obligation in this. He also permits Mr. Scully to have his column and an editorial and a review of a book and all. Does this sound like the editor who has been frightened to give up the whole thing?
Well, John, in relation to that question, I think that we can come up with an answer to that, because we do recall when we did go to see Bender after these occurrences, that Bender said that the issue was already at the printers at the time.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you. This last issue was set up and typed at the time.
And I believe that he had to go to the printer, and he figured that he'd save what he could of it. And
he saved a lot of it, I'll say that for him. He was an economical man when it came. So the only thing he did was to put in that paragraph to say it's all over, boys, in the editorial.
No, I think there was the editorial and the last lines on the last page, John. I believe he does have a farewell line on the last page there. I think you did
yes, we wish to thank... No,
yeah.
I was thinking of I read the line under the editorial.
Yeah, I presume about the only thing he changed was the editorial, that one paragraph on the bottom of the first page, and the farewell note in the back.
Well, possibly I didn't present my question clearly enough for you, Dominic. It would seem to me that a fellow who is so frightened that he doesn't even want to tell two members, two bosom pals, two buddies, two friends, what actually happened. Where did he get the guts to put out the last issue?
Well, actually, John, I think that he could very well get away with that, because due to the story as it was unfolded to us when we questioned Bender, and I may add, Bender did undergo some intensive high-pressure questioning by Mr. Roberts and myself, not only once, but twice in a row, with about a week separating each time. And I believe the second time Ray Barker was present. But certainly the last issue of Space Review does not reveal anything which would in any way endanger Bender when we consider the implications and the various innuendos that may be involved in what we did manage to infer from the intensive questioning routines. Mr. Roberts and myself, of course, before going to Bridgeport, we might say with forethought, certainly without malice, but with definite forethought, decided to perform a few feats of magic, if we want to use that term, in order that Mr. Roberts could write down all of Mr. Bender's statements and we did decide to hit him with rapid-fire questions continuously, one after the other. Hit him out of left field a little bit, try and throw him off balance, so that we may derive some information that would relate in some way, manner, or form to what were the secrets that he had discovered. And I would say that we were relatively successful, but during the course of this questioning period, I believe that our one mistake was that we asked so many questions that eventually we confused ourselves. And this did make it difficult for us finally to analyze what the pertinent questions may have or may not have been.
You learned absolutely
Well, we
nothing.
learned exactly what had happened as far as Bender was concerned. Maybe Bender did not reveal every minute detail relative to the visit of the three men in dark suits.
But he told you there were three men who came there.
Three men in dark suits visited him. And he did say one thing previous to that. He said that he had an idea. And he got up in the middle of the night and wrote down this idea, and that he had submitted this idea to some person or persons, which even to this day remain unknown. And that these three men appeared in his room, and with this particular document or idea which he had written in their possession. And he said that though they did not tell him at the time what flying saucers were, they did give him the reason for them being here, which were almost an exact quote of the words.
Did he tell you the reason?
No, he did not, John.
Why?
He said that it would place not only himself, but anyone else who knew the answer in great danger at the time.
I see. Either one of you two gentlemen may answer this next question, or series of questions. Presumably, Mr. Bender, who has written a book which we will discuss next week when Mr. Bender is here, we'll have the publisher with us, Mr. Barker, who wrote the first book that we're discussing at the moment, titled They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. But presumably, this man, Bender, was disturbed by the visit from these three men in black, and many rather unusual things happened to him, many things that gave him great concern and possibly made him consider from time to time that maybe his life was in danger. We also learned through Jim Mosley's publication, Saucer News, in the current issue, that Mr. Barker has had some very unusual things occur to him, such as which he felt he was possibly being forced off the highway by a black sedan after he agreed to publish Mr. Bender's book. He also has been receiving some threatening phone calls and a number of other things which I'm not going to go into in detail because Mr. Mosley has covered this in detail and you men are familiar with it. May I ask you, have you men had any phone calls that have caused you or members of your family concern in driving back and forth from your places of employment? Has anybody ever attempted to run you off the highway? Because evidently you knew a lot about these things and you continue to talk after Mr. Bender shut up.
Well, John, that's a very odd question, actually, because...
What's odd about it?
The oddity is of the fact that it's difficult to actually relate an event with the subject, but we could say that there were a few odd coincidences that did occur at the time, mainly one, the engine of Augie's Oldsmobile at the time overheated, which it had never done before and never did after, on that specific day when we were to go to Bender's and try and get him to divulge some information.
I hope that you don't want to give credit to the three men in black for that, do you?
Well, I don't know, John, but this is one of the odd coincidences, and we might add that Augie and myself had come back from one of the Bender meetings to my home and found the door to the house opened, which is something that does not occur very often, especially when there is no one home.
But you don't live in New York?
No, I live in Jersey.
Oh, I see. Because in New York this happens quite often.
But the door was open, nothing in the house was disturbed, and there were some other strange coincidences, such as putting lights out in certain rooms of the house and leaving and coming back and finding the lights on upon our return. Things of this nature did occur, but certainly I never truly associated them with the Bender mystery.
Jim?
John, I was just going to tell you that I know that Gray Barker was very anxious to bring out this Bender book, and he has been trying to do so for quite a long time. He wanted it to be out in February, and it didn't come out until May, as I recall. And I don't usually go along with Mr. Barker too
Which
far.
book are you referring
I'm talking about the new book now by Albert
came
K.
out in
Bender.
May?
Came out in May rather than February when it was first promised.
What year?
Of this year. Wasn't it May or June?
I don't think it ever came out in May.
Well, it was promised for February, and it was promised
Yes.
on and on.
I don't think it came out until June sometime. Or
Maybe
July, maybe.
early
No.
June. But he postponed this promise for a number of months and kept all of his fans and so on waiting. And as I say, I don't usually go along with Mr. Barker on anything, but I do think that he had a real desire to bring out this book. He knew it would be a profitable book. He knew that all of these people were waiting for it. And in this particular case, I tend to think that maybe some of these frightening things that he describes in my magazine might have happened, or at least he thought that they did. Because if it were not for real persecutions, why on earth would he keep his people waiting and take all the bad publicity that he's received in the last few months? That's the only
Well,
comment I
there are many reasons that we could credit to this type of action on his part. One, sometimes when a thing is delayed for a period of time, this creates more interest, especially if we don't say that there's a paper shortage or that the printers are on strike or, such simple reasons as that, but that maybe the plant was blown up or the ink became invisible after it was printed. Any number of things like this. This is quite fascinating, and this leads to good publicity, and I've talked about the thing maybe a half a dozen times or so. In fact, I received one very, very nasty letter from a lady. I talked about the book, and naturally it's not a commercial, and I have nothing to do with it. And she, in turn, tried to get the book and evidently sent for it, and it wasn't available, and she blamed me that it was not available at the time.
Well, that's the whole point, John. I know that you can build up suspense in this way, but I also know Gray well enough to have been told by him that he received hundreds of complaints.
I've been in the background, but absorbing a good deal. To refresh my memory, I read the book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, when it first came out. And momentarily, I guess I was impressed. But, if I may interrupt you again a moment. When I first read that book, I was doing the show about 3 months. I know it couldn't have been longer than that because I was still out in Carteret, New Jersey. You fellas came out there, too. The Carteret.
Both of us were out, John, sure.
Dominic and Archie came out there. And I read that book. It was sent to me by Gray Barker. And I'd heard of Ivan Sanderson, and Ivan Sanderson is sort of tied up in the book, too, you know what I mean? He's, not that they say he knew anything about flying saucers, but there was that mysterious...
But you know what he says.
But it's in the survey, Ivan is mentioned in there. So I was wondering about that book. I began to think, gee, there may be something to it. And as I say, I don't know that there isn't anything to it today, but if it took 10 years for Mr. Bender to tell us what he meant about the three men, and we're not going to talk about it now. I will admit one thing. It's one of the wildest, one of the most offbeat books that I've ever read. I'm talking about Bender's book. But we will handle that next week. So I want to concur with your thoughts on it. I was kind of fascinated by it.
Momentarily impressed, and then on reflection, and skimming over it again, I was less so. And now, to refresh my memory and also for further information, I would like to know from some of those here who know more than I do on this particular subject that I'm going to broach, the position of Mr. Dove in this.
And at one of the previous meetings with Bender, Bender had made the statement to Augie and myself that he intended to expand the Bureau, he intended to get more members, to get more countries, and all the plans were definitely of a positive nature, certainly all, we may say, aimed at increasing the Bureau's activity and increasing the number of incoming reports. In fact, at the time, I think that we did have about 2 cases in the Department of Investigation that we were working on when the fateful day came and Augie made that phone call.
Well, Don, let me ask you something else. At the very beginning of your statement, some time ago, you said that at this point you no longer have a particular interest in flying saucers, and I believe you said that you think that various solutions have been found for the sightings over the years. Now, can you comment on that in regard to the Bender question? What do you mean by this?
Oh, I feel sincerely that Bender did find a solution which was satisfactory to him. And I would make this statement, knowing Bender very well. I felt very close to Bender. Bender was that type of person. He was the type of person that was extremely likable, and the type of person someone would want to know. He exuded friendship, sincerity, and I certainly feel after the 2 visits to Bender after the close down of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, that Bender, as far as he was concerned, was definitely stating a fact of an occurrence which he was the primary, we may say, focal point for, and I think that Bender had gone through a lot just by his very appearance. He wasn't himself any longer. He lacked certain qualities which had been quite obvious in other visits. Bender was what we may term a frightened, relieved person. A person who finds out the answer to something he's been looking for a long time and is relieved at having found the answer and having had his curiosity satiated. And at the same time, the answer was definitely of a frightening nature to him. But I did give Augie out specific information relating to the appearance, to the physiological aspects, to the advent of the, we may say, it's very difficult to put into terms, but to the advent of the appearance of the three men and how they appeared and in what manner and form they appeared.
Well, I would say that at least Bender was consistent, because I think you know in about Christmas time of 1956, just around the time Gray Barker's book came out, I went up to Bridgeport myself to interview Bender, and he also gave me the same sort of hints and clues that I believe he gave to you, so I had a preview also of the new book by Bender as it now stands. So I think this was just information that he was willing to give out, apparently.
Actually, the information was not given in that way, Jim. This information was something I thought of for a long, long time after the Bender incident, after the 2 periods of intensive questioning with Augie and myself. Augie and I compiled many notes on these questions and answers. Augie gave Bender to understand that he wasn't feeling well at the time, and Augie consistently would use certain tricks that he had learned in magic, such as palming notepads and palming pencils, and Augie was actually collating all the various information as Bender made the statements. In fact, one statement I remember very clearly that Bender made at the time was that every time, and I quote, "Every time I hear a plane go over or look at the stars at night, I get frightened."
All right, but I'm saying this. I didn't have the background that you had with all these notes, plus the fact that Bender was antagonistic toward me. I think he felt from the beginning that I was somehow against him. Yet, when I went up to see him and asking just simple questions, but rather intensely perhaps, I got, I believe, as much of a clue as to what he was trying to say as you did, and it didn't take any great amount of trickery.
Would you mind relating what type of clue you got? We're not asking for the information.
No, I don't want to get too far into it, because then we're into the new book. I say that
I
I
mean,
got the
just a
basic
clue.
thought there.
You did get a thought, but was this thought given out very clearly, or was it
No,
given
he
out
hit
as
it
a
around.
slip? Was it a slip of the tongue? Was it a slip on Bender's part? You have to realize that subconsciously, Bender did want to give out the secret. He wanted us to know, Jim.
Now, I can't
Desperately, we might have
say
to.
if he slipped on purpose or accidentally, but I say that he apparently was almost as generous with information to a stranger whom he didn't like as he was with his friend.
Aren't you presuming this dislike?
Well, I know it now exists. I don't know if it did then. The very fact that I came up there and questioned him bothered him greatly, and I think he was bothered equally by the fact that you two went up there. I don't think he wanted to be questioned by anyone, and that's been your point, too,
May I
hasn't
ask
it?
you a question, Jim? When you went up there, did you mention Augie and myself?
Well, he knew who I was.
Therefore, you went up there with a previous, giving him a previous knowledge that some of the confidence he may have felt in Augie and myself was transferred to you.
Not at all, because he was
You
familiar with the negative tone,
Yeah, but
so-called,
did you
of my
go as a
magazine.
stranger? That is what I'm asking. As an absolute stranger, or did you use Augie Roberts and my name as a to get your foot in the door, so to speak?
No, I didn't. I didn't use it. He was on my mailing list for Saucer News. He had read all the issues up to that time, and I simply said I wanted to interview him, and I got about a half hour or so of an interview, and I got the basic hint.
He was not cagey.
Well, he was a little cagey. He didn't want to be questioned by me or by Augie or by Dom or anyone else. He wanted to be left alone.
Why do
But
you think
when
that?
questioned, he would always say practically the same thing.
Why do you think he was reluctant to be questioned by anybody?
I think he just, for whatever strange motives he may have had, he wanted to be left alone on this
Yeah,
subject.
but do you have a reason, or...
Well, we've been through the different possibilities of what may have happened, but I really think there was a genuine feeling on his part not to want to be bothered. But when someone would come, he would usually try to be halfway polite.
Well, you have to understand that his very basic nature was one of friendliness and welcome to people, whether they be strangers or friends. This was one of the innate qualities possessed by Albert K. Bender, and I might add an admirable one.
Then there was a later time after I did my write-up on my first interview with Bender, which wasn't at all unfavorable, I didn't think. It was quite fair. And then sometime after that, I can't remember just what year that was, but since 56, maybe around 58, I went back up there again, and I didn't get past the door. So that interview didn't go quite as well.
Well,
I
that
know
was
at this point that he feels that I'm against him, which I'm not. I just like to understand what really happened. Even after reading the new book, I don't know what really happened. I'm still as much in the dark as I ever was.
Well, you'd have to understand that the occurrences as related in the new book, which by the way, I have not had an opportunity to read completely, would in effect cause someone to be reluctant to divulge information of that type. the very nature of the information is extremely difficult to speak upon.
But you mean
And,
a person might write about it but not speak of it?
Let's put it this way. You have to remember that these questioning periods were long before Bender ever wrote about this information. This was during the period of time whereupon he still could not speak on this matter. And during the questioning periods by Augie and myself, Bender said that we asked him, would he ever be able to reveal this? And he said maybe in 5 years or so, but he never could give us the background information as to the nature of the time period or the time extension of the we may say his ability to divulge this information, Stuart. So
I think the key lies in Gray Barker rather than in Bender himself. All activity instantly. If it weren't true that he received some, whether it was a visit from 3 men, 2 men, or 1 man, but something made this man fearful, because I can't go along with the implication that was once made either by you or by somebody writing an article in your publication, Jim, that this would be a build-up for a book that a man is going to write 10 years later. Because if that's true, then the man has no knowledge of publicity. You don't have some stunts pulled to promote a book 10 years in advance.
No, we were talking about possibly Barker wanting to write a book.
Oh, you mean Barker's book?
Yes,
Well,
not
that was kindly for Barker's book,
That's
yes.
right.
Now, if I may, that's October 18th. This is typed on stationery, Albert K Bender, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Same stationery, but this is handwritten, and this is dated November 12th. Dear Augie, got your letter. If you are coming up to see me, please do not expect to discuss, and the word in quotes, saucers in any way, shape, or form. I do not care to talk about this subject to anyone anymore. If you are making the trip for this purpose, I would rather not have you come. If it is purely a friendly visit, you are welcome. However, I will not, and he underlines will not, be home Saturday, and will be home only after 5 p.m. Sunday, so please call me if you will be up after that time. I am making special trips each weekend, and will not be home very much. Signed, as always, Al Bender. Now a typed letter that is typewritten, dated December 20th, also on Albert K. Bender stationery, this time signed, your friend Al. Very pleased with your visit, even though you did throw numerous questions at me. Your visits are always welcome. And then there's a paragraph that has absolutely nothing to do with the visit except just a word of thanks on the part of Al for some little thing that Augie brought to Al as a gift. The third paragraph is as follows. How was your trip back this time? Did you show Gray a good time, and did he say whether he enjoyed himself here at my home? I was just wondering his reaction to me and my room. The room I described from the pictures that I have in front of me. And then he goes on to say that Dom, referring to Dominic Lucchesi, who is with us, has some fine ideas. And other than that, there's nothing more in this letter that would be of interest. It's more or less of a personal nature, but has nothing to do with the story. Now, it's certainly obvious that this man, at that time, wanted no part of flying saucers. And certainly, the man would never talk to me on the phone when I called him many times. Would never come to New York to be interviewed, which certainly would have been of some value if they were trying to promote Gray's book or his book or any book. But never at any time would this man talk. And that's why I've always wondered whether there's anything to your suggestion that maybe Gray perpetrated this. That is by sending 3 men over there. Or whether there's some truth to this whole story. 10 years later, I say he, I'm referring to Al Bender, is a real far-out book. It's a book that many people are going to say is absolutely kooky. And yet, you read the book and you begin to wonder, is this written by a man who believes this? Is this written by a man who thinks that he's a science fictionist? Or is this written by a man who just sat down and anything that came to his mind he was going to put down, and maybe somebody came along and straightened it out? Somebody who's an editor and a writer rewrote the thing for him. I do not know. But we're going to have that man on next Friday night. In the meantime, the men who gave all the information for the book, they knew too much about flying saucers and had the direct association with Bender, are right here with us now. Yes, Audrey?
John, if I can say something about the book, just a little thing. I've read many books on science fiction. I've read practically all the UFO books out, and this one here is the one that really shook me up a little bit. I read it during a lightning storm, all alone at home, and I was amazed.
At the storm?
At the storm?
At the book.
I'm quite certain.
In other words, you knew Bender very well. Let's reestablish this. You met him only, I think, 4 times, but you know the man's personality and you know his beliefs. Is that correct?
I know this because we had many discussions on it, Jim.
All right,
That's the only
fine.
reason.
Because you started a moment ago by saying that you're not quite sure, and now I see that you are. I'm glad. All right, now you know that for a fact. Was he interested in science fiction before being in the
Definitely, he collected science fiction.
All right. I'm just trying to find out this man's personality in case we could find a clue to what happened in this whole case. Now, we also know, don't we? I'm sure you know much better than I, having seen the room more than once. I believe we may have touched on this also earlier, that Mr. Bender had a most unusual type of room in which he lived on the 3rd floor of his father-in-law, or rather his stepfather's home, I believe, right? Would you like to describe this room to
Yes, I will describe the room. The room that Bender had, he eventually changed into what he used to call his, I don't recall, he had a term for it, but we didn't call it...
Chamber of Horrors, wasn't it, Don?
Horrors.
Yeah, and Bender was extremely interested in much of the literature pertaining to vampires and various other types of occult phenomena. And therefore, Bender decided to convert the room into a form of Chamber of Horrors with sound effects and with the, we may say, redundant use of fluorescent paints. He did convert the room into a so-called Chamber of Horrors. Strangely enough, Bender's artistic talents were of such a nature that he was able to combine all these, we may say, horrific scenes of ghouls and vampires and skeletons and all types of interplanetary, so-called, we may say, interplanetary motifs. And he was capable of combining these into such a beautiful artistic form that in some way the room was extremely comfortable, it was extremely pleasant to be in, and certainly did not have any of its horrific intent until the lights were turned out, and Bender had a special tape recording made, which in turn had sound effects such as thunder, lightning, and moans and groans and what have you. And Bender used this room as a showpiece. In other words, he would have groups come from various institutions and schools and come up and put on the show for him.
Institutions, yeah. Well, I just would like to ask you this, Don. This is the last question of this particular series. Now, this man is supposed to be running a scientific organization. I mean, this is what we tried to describe it as in the beginning. At least it's an international group. It's trying to look into saucers in a balanced, objective manner, according to what we've been told here tonight. Now, I ask you, do you believe that the head of this group should properly be thought of as living in this type of room? And do you think that the headquarters of an international organization, and that was the actual headquarters of it, this particular room, as I understand it, does that sound to you, as an objective type of person, the type of atmosphere that would lend objectivity to this great research of Mr. Bender's?
Well, I'm certain that anyone with a strong mind, such as Mr. Bender had, would not be influenced in any way, manner, or form by his surroundings.
Now, why would...
to any degree whereupon it would, we may say, deviate his will from this task at hand. We have to recall that Bender also collected clocks, which he repaired himself, which he reassembled himself.
That's more orthodox.
And therefore, this showed that the man was skilled in the field of mechanics. The man was definitely skilled in the field of mathematics. He used to do as a hobby, he would make up various types of games. When I say games, I mean board-type games. In fact, he showed Augie and myself one, which consisted of a game which was so complex in its mathematical implications that only a man with a brilliant perspective could design anything of that nature.
That has nothing to do with my question, of course. I was asking you a particular question which you didn't care to answer.
Oh, rephrase the question.
I'm asking you if a man... Well, let me put it to you a different way. Do you think that a person who is attracted to the idea of living and sleeping day after day in that type of atmosphere is running a scientific organization, in your opinion?
Absolutely. I know he was running a scientific organization. It's not a matter of thinking, Jim.
Is that the atmosphere that gives one a scientific
Any
balance view?
atmosphere depends on the individual. And certainly the atmosphere in no way affected Bender's way of thinking. Because the atmosphere was created on a secondary impulse rather than as a primary source of Bender's, we may say, oh, good gosh, there is a term for it, but we'll say of Bender's inspiration.
That's very strange. You say the atmosphere didn't affect his way of thinking. Why did he create the atmosphere?
I told you he created it for purposes of giving some enjoyment to other people who... why does Hollywood create...
Do you enjoy that type of atmosphere?
Absolutely. I felt always very comfortable in Bender's room. I think Augie did, too. I think it was a very, very...
Well, that wasn't his question. I don't think. Maybe
No,
it's
yeah, I enjoy that type of atmosphere.
See, the fact that you're very comfortable. In other words, I can... I myself, I don't happen to care for certain places, certain environments, but if I happen to go to some place and I happen to like the people there, I forget the environment, the atmosphere of the room. I think the question was, and you have not answered it, and you rephrase it again for me.
Well, I can't do any better than this. I'll just say I wasn't comfortable there.
Jim,
You were there?
I've been there, of course.
I thought you said you never met him.
No, I did say, John, that I interviewed him in 1956 and very
That's
briefly.
3 years after the...
That's right.
The three men.
Yeah.
Let me just identify the station men a moment, please. This is WOR Radio, your station in New York. 710 on your AM dial and 98.7 on your FM dial, an RKO General Station. I was under the impression that Ben Iskwit was going to call tonight, but evidently he didn't.
Many a times they were held over at Kringle's house.
What sort of house did Kringle have?
I don't know. I never met the man.
I see. In other words, that would have been probably a more
It might
objective...
have been more objective, what you term objective.
I mean, I'm getting at it, the point, rather, that it wasn't entirely a mail-order thing. Surely his own staff had to meet him, and surely it must have made a bad impression, as he informs us, incidentally, in the new book.
I'm certain his staff knew about Bender's room previous to their tie-in with the organization, Jim. So I presume they were all accustomed to Bender's...
Idiosyncrasy?
I wasn't going to use that term, Stuart. You're putting words in my mouth, but I'm certain they were accustomed to Bender's tastes or Bender's hobbyist attitude. And it was strictly a hobby with Bender. He certainly wasn't a fanatic on the horror scheme. In fact, I know darn well that Bender would just as quick from one week to the next change the room if he...
might have a lot of angels around him. Is that
inclination.
Let me ask you this. Would a person who lives in that type of room by any possible chance be predisposed toward having a psychic experience of some sort, rather than the average man on the street who doesn't have that type of room?
Well, first we have to validate the term psychic experience.
An experience, well, let me use a different word. Let me say that would he possibly have an experience which would be real only to him?
Well, again, this again, Jim, is sort of a loaded question. What you're saying, is it within the realm of possibility? I believe anything is within the realm of possibility. And therefore, I would have to answer your question to the affirmative.
Do you think environment in general has any effect on people? Do you think that children, for instance, are the product of their environment?
I would say this, that certain environments have some effect on some people.
Now
but all environments do not have effect on all people.
You mean there are some environments that have no effect on certain people?
There are, some people have no inclination to be affected by any environment, while other people are prone to be affected by certain
environments. And Bender was such
environments.
a strong person, in your opinion, that he could not be affected by this particular
Absolutely, in my
environment.
opinion.
Well, then wouldn't he be also disinterested in having such scenes around him, if he was that oblivious to them?
No, because I think that it was just a whim, definitely just a whim, and having had occasion to belong to many groups which were science fiction fan clubs, Bender did have many original illustrations coming into him that were created by artists who worked for the various magazines, and rather than put these away where they wouldn't be seen, he was prone to display them, which anyone would. I'm certain I would like to have certain scenes drawn by very, very excellent artists, like, let us say, for one of Lovecraft's books, or some of the originals from Weird Tales. The art is art irrelevant of the subject material, and Bender displayed it.
But I wouldn't call this batch of skeletons art in any sense of the word.
The skeletons actually were just the sort of, we may say, the embellishment of the actual gems of art that he had displayed.
Embellishment?
I'd say so. I think that it was just a matter of
beautifying.
Filling in a spot here and filling in a place there.
But I know they're very prominent in those pictures, man who chooses to live in that atmosphere.
Well, let us take a man who lives in that type of atmosphere as a profession. Would it have any effect on him?
Well, his profession at the present is writing. Now, we're not going into the contents of the book, but I would say that the contents of the book and the contents of his room are of a piece.
Well, I don't see anything in the book
They're in harmony. They are in harmony. They're not in harmony with the organization.
I don't see anything in the book relating to skeletons or relating to the occult or relating...
Yes, you have the brimstone, you have these, well, let's not... They're getting into it.
Stuart, there's a point, too, here. A very short while after the three men visited Bender, his room was taken apart, and he is not buying any more science fiction magazines. Or
His room was taken apart?
Was taken apart in,
With the
skeletons and all, and it's a
They were
normal
taken
room
apart?
today.
I thought I saw them there in 1956, if I'm not mistaken.
As far as I understand, the room was dismantled.
You see, here's a point I just want to bring out. You just heard Mosley's statement. He thought he saw them there in 1956. Now, if they were there, they did not have any such effect. He don't even remember whether he saw them in there.
I don't live there.
Secondly, if they weren't there, he wouldn't know, so I can't see how he based his former statements.
Dom, you assume an awful lot on an awful little. You meet a man 4 times, and you're able to sit here and tell us that you know as a fact that that environment has no effect on him. Now, you're an awfully good judge of human nature.
I didn't say it doesn't, Jim. I'm certainly entitled to my opinion.
Indeed you are, but can you expect us to accept that opinion when it isn't
Naturally
mine?
not. I have no professional opinions to dissertate upon. I have no license. Have you a license in psychology or psychiatry?
I have my feelings about
Have you a
psychology.
license?
A license to practice psychology?
Do you? Or psychiatry? No, of course not.
All right.
On the air.
That's why I only stated as an opinion.
Fine, but
But actually, if you come to me and tell me Bender is slightly
I didn't say what he was.
psychotic or
No,
something
I
of this
didn't say
nature,
that,
or
did I?
is suffering from a type of neuroses.
Now,
or-
you're saying
I mean,
something.
if
I didn't
you,
say
I
it.
said if you said this to me, did I not?
Well,
So what are
I
you
certainly,
doing then?
I made no such statement. You're
I
making
said
that
if
statement.
you said this
You
to me,
seem to
correct?
have it in the back of your mind that might be true. I made no such implication.
Who said you did?
You did.
No, I said if you said.
Well, I didn't.
Now, aren't you listening, Jim?
I'm certainly trying to follow your
After all,
train
I
of
wish you'd
thought.
listen to my terms.
I don't understand some of your
I
terms.
qualify my main terms very specifically. And this, as you know, is a habit of mine. And I said if. I use that term very, very qualifyingly. And I said if you were to say these things about Bender, you would be practicing psychiatry or psychology without a license.
Well, we
because
admit
you
that I
are
didn't say them, so I'm not doing it.
All
So
right.
why bring up a
Well, therefore,
point
what
that doesn't
did you
exist?
say? Would you mind rephrasing exactly what you said in the beginning?
I haven't said anything. I've asked you a series of questions which you haven't answered properly.
You
I
made
haven't
some
made any
definite
statements.
statements in regards to my opinion in reference to Bender's mental condition brought about by the configuration of his room. Did you not?
I simply want to know how you found out that much about the man in 4 visits.
This you said later. I'm going back to what you said previous to that statement.
What did I say previous to that?
You
if you
said
recall?
that the appearance of the room would be conducive to creating some type of traumatic
Oh, I
effect
asked
in an
you if
individual.
you thought it might.
Well, do you, Jim?
I think it might, yes.
You think it might? In other words, you're not sure.
But you're awfully sure that it wouldn't, which is very
I know
strange.
Bender better than you do.
But not very much better. That's my
Well, now,
whole
this
point.
is a matter of degree. Now, how are we going to differentiate?
Now,
Did you discuss philosophy the day you were up there with
I've
Bender?
known you, Dominic, for
Answer my
about
question.
8 years, and I don't know you thoroughly yet, and I don't think that you knew Bender after 4 1-hour
Did you discuss philosophy with Bender?
I discussed his silencing, which was my purpose in
you
going
did
up
not
there.
discuss philosophy with the men.
What
In other
type
words,
of
did you or
philosophy?
did you discuss philosophy with the men?
No, not philosophy.
Did you discuss sociology with the men?
Didn't know he knew anything about it.
Did you discuss his theological attitudes with the men?
His theological attitude?
Right.
No. Why
Did
would
you
I?
discuss his scientific attitudes?
Why would I?
Huh?
Why?
So therefore, you cannot make. Therefore, I can know this man better than you did.
Well,
For the
slightly
simple
better,
reason
yeah.
that I discussed these very subjects with him over a period of hours at a time.
In other
And
words,
therefore, these are the basis for all human knowledge in relation to knowing another human being. Is the man's philosophy, is the way he thinks, is his background, his experiences. This is what you evaluate a man's character on. And definitely, I reiterate the statement, Bender is a man of the highest character and emblematic of what most people would like to be.
Well, it's very nice. I think that's the young lady. It must be the young lady we had the pleasure of talking with the other morning. Sonia Smith, I think her name. We have another telegram here from Henry Rule. Memo to Grand Inquisitor Jim. Please drop the cloak of a district attorney and show some courtesy to the guests. Your manner of questioning is offensive to me. Your constant interruptions preclude the guest from completing any sentence, and your conduct in general is arrogant and rude in the extreme. Signed, Henry Rule.
well, I don't know how to comment on that, John.
So there's no need to. I mean, there's no necessity to comment.
Okay.
This is WOR Radio. Your station in New York, 710 on your AM dial and 98.7 on your FM dial, and RKO General Station. This morning we're talking Dominic Lucchesi, Augie Roberts, James Mosley, and Stuart Robb. Next Friday night, not Saturday, but Friday night, we'll be talking to Albert K. Bender. After a decade of silence, we are told that he will tell us everything about the 3 men who came to his home back in the latter part of the summer of 1953 and said something to him that caused him to disband the International Flying Saucer Bureau. This was the first worldwide civilian organization that investigated flying saucers. And after this alleged contact by these three men, Mr. Bender refused to speak to anyone about flying saucers and to give the details about what occurred during this visit. He has written a book published by Gray Barker, who wrote the book They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And in the book, Mr. Bender tells us what he considers to be the details of what has occurred during the past 10 years.
This is tape number 1 of the Long John Nebel party line broadcast concerning the Albert K Bender book, Flying Saucers and the Three Men, which was broadcast over WOR radio Saturday morning, September the 1st, 1962.
Hi, neighbors. This is Long John once again. We're around from midnight to 5 o'clock 5 mornings during the week, and of course on weekends we're around till 5:30, and that means we're on the air for some 36 hours a week. And during that time I have the pleasure of talking with many interesting people. Well, not quite a week ago, actually, it was last Saturday night, we invited a group of people to be with us. And I think it's important to bring you up to date. Actually, some years ago, a man by the name of Gray Barker wrote a book titled They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. In this remarkable volume, he told many strange tales, but none so amazing as the episode of the Three Men in Black. Last Saturday night, as a prologue to this evening, Augie Roberts, Dominic Lucchesi, James Mosley, and Stuart Robb discussed that book and those alleged mysterious visitors. We heard how Albert K. Bender built and then disbanded almost overnight the most prominent flying saucer investigation organization in the country. And as far as we could understand it, pardon me, he did all this because he was visited by this trio in dark clothes. Now tonight we have the two men who really know the inside story. Albert K. Bender, the man who lived it, and Gray Barker, the man who brought it to the public. I've also invited James Mosley to be with us tonight. Jim is the editor of Saucer News, the official publication of the Saucer and Unexplained Celestial Events Research Society. Unfortunately, Walter McGraw, radio and TV producer, will not be able to be with us tonight. I was hoping the very last minute that maybe something would happen that Walter could join us. He was very anxious to be on this show, but he has not been feeling well for a day or two. And so we're going to be talking with these two men this morning. And I can assure you one thing, that this book that Mr. Bender has written, titled Flying Saucers and the Three Men, is a real far-out book. I have met Mr. Bender for the first time this morning. Just about a decade ago, a little less than that, Mr. Bender had this unusual experience that we talked about last week And then a few years later, I think it was in the latter part of 1956, I met Mr. Barker. He wrote the book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, and he was a guest of mine when I was doing the program from Carteret, New Jersey. And he told us about this man Bender many, many times during the past 6 years. We've made an effort to contact him directly through acquaintances to see if he would come on the show to tell us about this story. And I've never spoken to him until this evening when he arrived at the studio here, and he never appeared on the show. So tonight, we hope we'll be able to bring to you the inside story about the three men, and also to learn more about Albert K. Bender. Mr. Bender, I've been very, very anxious to have the opportunity of talking with you for, I guess it's about, well, almost 6 years. I've been doing this show a little more than 6 years. We're into our 7th year now. And Mr. Barker told us a very fantastic story about these three men in black. Rather than hearing that story for the moment, I'd like to ask you this question. Have you read the book, presumably written by Albert K. Bender, titled Flying Saucers and the Three Men? In other words, the book that it's claimed that you've written. Did you read it yourself?
Of course.
You have. Presumably, then, you wrote the book with possibly some editorial assistance at all, right?
Very little.
Very little. The book is yours, then.
That's right.
And then we may assume that this is not a work of fiction.
It is not fiction. It's a true story.
This is a true story, just as it occurred to you.
That's right.
There was a story around some time ago, but you've been out of the business, if we can call it a business, or the hobby, or whatever you'd like to label it. You've been out of it for almost 10 years, so maybe you haven't kept up with reading the various saucer publications. But Mr. Bender, somebody, it may have been Mr. Mosley in his publication, suggested some time ago that he thought that maybe Gray Barker, who was a publisher and a writer and a saucer enthusiast, hired three men to come to your home to frighten you. On the other hand, it has been suggested that maybe he didn't do this to frighten you. He told you in advance that a few years from now we can write a book and make a classical buck on it. Is there any truth to that rumor, Mr. Bender?
No, there is no truth to that whatsoever.
When these three men came to your home that particular day or night, this was the first time that you saw them.
That's right.
When did this actually happen, the arrival of the men? Do you remember the date, sir?
The first meeting I had with anyone very strange was on May 15th, 1952.
May 15th, 1952.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Is that the particular day that Gray Barker mentions in his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers?
That's right.
All right. Now, was this in the evening or the afternoon? Or
This was
morning?
in the evening.
About what time?
Well, I was going to a movie in a local town. And, of course, it was a science fiction movie. When I got into the moving picture theater, to the left of me, I thought I saw someone sitting, and I wasn't sure. And as I gazed to the left of me, I noticed two eyes were staring at me, and they had sort of a fluorescent look, like two flashlight bulbs shining.
This happened in the theater.
That's right. But then I thought it might be the screen shining on the eyes of this particular person, making that sort of a illusion that I got. Then suddenly I noticed that the person was gone, but I didn't hear him move out of his seat. And then the next thing I knew, this person was sitting on the right side of me. And the eyes were
Directly
also
next to you, sir?
the next seat, on the right of me, in the same aisle. And the eyes were still glowing. So I got rather frightened at the time. Then the next thing I knew, he disappeared from that position where he was sitting. And I figured, well, he left the theater. Then I had the uncanny feeling that someone was staring at me from behind, and the hair seemed to stand up on the back of my neck. And I turned, and this person was sitting directly behind me, and the eyes were staring at me again.
In the next aisle?
The aisle in back of me.
Yes.
So I got up, and I went up to the back of the theater, and I reported it to the theater manager. I thought someone was playing a joke on me. So he sent the usher down with the flashlight
to check the aisle and to find out if anyone was playing pranks or anything like that. But they couldn't find anyone. So I moved to another section of the theater, but I lost interest in the picture at the time. I watched a bit longer, and I left the theater. And as I was going down Main Street, Bridgeport, I like to look in store windows and do shopping, window shopping like most people do. And I was looking at records, phonograph records, and anything, camera equipment and things of that nature that I'm interested in. And I happened to be looking in this one window. I had my face pressed up practically against the window trying to read one of the labels on one of the record albums. And someone was standing in the storefront behind me, in the dark, in the shadow. And I turned and looked, and it was the same individual that was in the moving picture theater. And he had the same type of eyes, and they were shining as if they were two light flashlight bulbs. So I immediately left this area, and I went to a policeman on the corner, and I reported it to him. I told him that someone seemed to be following me or playing a prank on me. So the police officer walked back with me to the store where I saw this individual. But he wasn't there any longer. So the police officer said, "Are you sure you haven't had one too many and you're seeing things?" And I said, "No, I'm sure I saw an individual standing there staring at me." So I continued on home, and I hoped that when I got home I wouldn't find this individual waiting for me at my home. When I did arrive home, I lived in a 3-story building on Broad Street in Bridgeport with my stepfather. On the 3rd floor, there was a large attic, quite large in size, 40 by 60, we'll say, approximately. There were 3 other rooms in this attic. 2 of the rooms were vacant. One of them I used as a meeting room later on for club members, the organization. The other was a den in which I had fixed up for myself as a hobby. I had drawn pictures on the wall of the fantastic and of horrible creatures that you might see in science fiction movies, Frankenstein's monster, and things of that nature. And on one wall I had the complete universe drawn. And I had my own conception of what the other side of the moon looked like, and I drew that on the wall as well. And on the ceiling I had fluorescent paint in various spots so that when the lights went out, it gave the effect of stars and the solar system. And I also had gadgets fixed up so that thunder and lightning could be used in the room. I had lights fixed behind chairs and so on so that it would flash and give the effect of lightning, and I had tape recordings of thunder. And this was actually a hobby. I had many hobbies. Years before that, I had a hobby of collecting postcards, and I put these all over the walls of my room. And I have a picture here I brought along to show you of that. This was years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Then
You've taken off a lot of weight, too, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yes, you certainly have. Doesn't look like the same man. Continue, sir. Sorry.
And then I got into this other hobby of drawing creatures on the walls and so on, which I know sounds very odd, but lots of people have odd hobbies. I'm not the only one that had the odd hobby. Of course, many people that came there to see the room called me an oddball, and they said I was crazy. And newspaper reporters even said that I might be a crackpot. But these things you have to leave go by, because if it's your hobby, you're going to continue in it. They're not going to stop you from doing these things. However, this is getting away from the actual thing I started with. It was very late, around 11 o'clock when I got home, and I went up the stairs to the 2nd floor, and that is where we had 2 bedrooms. And usually I went up to my den to take care of anything I might have to do up there before retiring. There was a creaking staircase went up to the attic room where the den was located, and it was very weird at times, especially on a rainy night. The boards creaked and the rafters creaked, and it gave a very weird appearance. In fact, if you were in there on a dark night, it would look like the place in which Dr. Frankenstein created his monster. All you needed would be the instruments he used and the things going through the roof or an opening in the roof. As I went up the stairs and turned the light out at the top of the stairs, I walked to my den door. Usually this was the same pattern I used all the time. There was a bluish light coming from underneath the door. It startled me at first, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I thought, well, maybe it's a light from outside shining in or from the back window. So I opened the door cautiously. In the middle of the room, there was an object glowing as if it was hovering off the floor, and it was a bluish haze around this object. As soon as I switched the light on, it disappeared. Couldn't see it any longer. Now, that was the first time I had anything unusual happen to me. And that was at the time when I started having ideas about starting an organization for flying saucers. Because my interest in flying saucers goes all the way back to 1945. I was collecting
Before Kenneth Arnold, then? Kenneth
any
Arnold,
odd
47th,
things
I
that
think,
appeared in the sky, or any strange phenomena.
Did you
that
read
might be
Fort?
seen. Yes, I have read various parts of his book.
Then the story that you just related to us is not actually the time that these three men came.
No, this happened prior to that.
This is before you actually started your flying saucer organization.
That's right.
Now, did anything else, I mean, many things have happened which we're going to get into, but in other words, between that day or that night when you decided that you were going to set up a flying saucer organization, were you contacted in that rather mysterious way at any other time?
By phone calls. I might state here that the organization was started January 15th, 1952, but this meeting with this strange creature at my home was in May 1952, which was after the organization had started. I want to correct you on that.
The organization had started?
That's right.
Oh, I see. I thought that you said that this was when you got the idea that you'd be interested in flying saucers and you would set up an organization.
No, the organization was started January 15th, 1952, and this first meeting of anything strange was May 15th, 1952.
May 15th.
The strange phone calls that I got were around July 30th, 1952. The phone rang, I answered it, and there wasn't any voice on the phone whatsoever, and there wasn't any dial tone at the time, which you usually get when you lift up the receiver. But there was sort of a message telepathically seemed to come over the phone to me, telling me to stay away from flying saucers, steer clear of this thing that you're delving in or trying to delve into.
The organization had been formed for about 6 months at that time when you received the first mysterious phone call.
That's right. Of course, I spoke into the phone at the time to see if it was a hoax, if someone was trying to play a trick on me. But suddenly, the dial tone came back on the phone, and that was the end of it.
Well, what would this prove, sir? If your phone rang and supposing I called you and dialed your number and it rang and you answered it, but I don't say anything. I put my hand on the mouthpiece of the phone.
That's possible too. I realize that.
And what would happen if you said, "Hello, who's there?" I mean, this wouldn't prove anything, would it?
No, it wouldn't. No.
And eventually, I either hang up or the line goes dead and the dial tone appears.
That's true.
Is heard once again, is audible.
But it was a strange sensation I got that came into my mind, and it seemed to pulsate over my eyes.
There are so many avenues to get into on this, and I want to ask you a couple of questions. We're jumping way ahead of the point that you're discussing now at the particular time. You evidently had no fear of this unusual individual who could disappear and reappear again. You did have a fear in the theater?
Yes, I did.
Did you stay for the entire performance?
No, I left soon after. I watched a bit of it, but I couldn't get any interest in the picture after that.
But you window shopped, though.
Yes, I stopped.
You were able to window shop a little bit.
Well, I felt that once I was out on the street, I was out of a closed building, and...
Do you remember anything about this man's appearance, that is, as far as clothing was concerned?
Yes, he was in dark clothing, but it appeared like any normal person would.
Just a dark business
suit
or something like that, with a tie and collar.
It was just the eyes that was very strange.
And he said nothing to you?
Not a thing.
And didn't communicate with you telepathically either?
Not at that time.
Now, a little later, as you explained to us, you saw this bluish haze and so forth and so on that you've described. This must have created a little fear, didn't it?
Oh, yes, it did. At first, I thought it might be a hallucination. After having seen the thing in the theater.
Do you hallucinate easily?
No, I do not.
This would be very unique for you, then?
Yes, it would.
Why did you think of a hallucination?
Well, I thought after seeing this strange creature in the movie and then seeing him again on the street, that...
it was the same man?
Yes.
Now that he was pictured in the motion picture, and then you saw the same individual on the street?
No, he was not in the motion picture.
You
the
mean
individual that sat next to me in the theater.
I understand now. But you continued on with your saucer group.
That's right.
Did you ever tell any members of the saucer group about this particular experience that happened on
Not
May
until
15th?
later on. Not until later on, when I had the real contact. When I met the 3 men in black.
And may I ask, at that time, who did you tell?
Various members of the group, but of course they didn't believe me.
Well, you didn't tell them. Did you tell Dominic Lucchesi?
Yes, I did.
Well, you merely told them about 3 men in black.
That's
you
right.
didn't give them details.
No, I
about
didn't
the
give 'em-
bluish haze.
No,
or-
I didn't give them any of the details.
Did you give them any details then about what happened on May 15th in the theater?
No, I did not.
Did you give this information to anyone?
No one.
No one.
No.
So basically, no one had any knowledge of what happened to you on May 15th,
Except the police officer.
who was near the store. And
That's
who
right.
suggested that possibly you'd been drinking too much.
That's right, and I don't drink.
Why was there such a reluctance not to confide? I don't think that there was a necessity for you to confide or anything, but that you would like to share this frightening experience with members of your organization or relatives or personal friends. Why is it that nothing was told about the experience that you had May 15th, and yet nothing was told when the 3 men in black, except you said 3 men came to your home, and then from that period on, back in 1953 until possibly you started to write maybe a year or 2 years ago, almost 7 or 8 years lapsed before you were willing to tell anybody. What was the reason for the silence during all those years, Mr. Bender?
Well, I was afraid that, as I said before, the object I did see in the room might have been a hallucination, or it might have been something of the supernatural, which you read about quite a bit, people seeing strange things.
Yes.
And then the individual in the theater, it could have been anyone
Right.
playing a trick on me. Knowing that I was interested in flying saucers and so on, he could have done that purposely.
That's true.
But the actual contact with the 3 men came after we decided to have a World Contact Day on March 15, 1953. We sent out circulars to all of our members that we were going to have a World Contact Day. This
Mr. Bender is handing me a copy of that circular.
That is a mimeograph copy that was sent round the world to all members of the organization to participate in this particular experiment. We were going to try by mental telepathy to contact any saucer occupants that might be about, if there were any such things at the time. We put dates on there and hours when this experiment was to take place round the world, because we had branches round the world, and we wanted everyone to take part in it at exactly the same minute so that the message would be that much stronger and it might be sent
In
forth.
other words, if
from there.
everybody is thinking of this same message, there's a possibility that it would create some sort of psychic power.
That's right.
And
they may
it
pick
would
it
be
up.
received by the people in the saucers.
That's right.
Just for a moment to digress from this story as you're relating it to us, do you still believe in flying saucers, Mr. Bender?
Yes, I do. After having had the experience that I
And
had.
where do flying saucers come from?
Where they come from, I'm not sure. But when they visited me, they used a particular word, and it was spelled K-A-Z-I-K. And that was pronounced
Well,
the
I'm sorry,
way
would you spell it again?
K-A-Z-I-K.
I-K.
And I have a feeling that that might be the name of the place they come from. But they
Is that a
didn't,
planet, sir?
They
you
didn't
think?
inform me to that effect, that it was a planet or anything else, but they seemed to use that word.
I asked you a question just a moment ago, Mr. Bender. I said to you, let's digress for a moment. I said, do you still believe in flying saucers? And you said, yes, after I had that contact. And then you go on to spell this name, and you tell me you think this is possibly the place that they come from. You have not had a contact with a saucer, though, have you?
I have not had a contact with a saucer, although I believe the experience I had in the room with the glass dome, where I was transported to, was
Which is
the
in your book,
inside
yes.
of a saucer. But I never actually did fly in a saucer. I might have been in one, but I was transported there. How they did it to me, I do not know,
Well-
except that I had this little metal disc, which I'll tell you about later.
Right.
And I had to hold this in my hand. And these 3 men were transported with me at the same time. This little small disc evidently had some sort of radio equipment in it or something of that nature, or an instrument far beyond what we could ever think of.
But to your knowledge, that is in your, for lack of terminology now, in your waking state, as you are at the present moment, you're not being telepathically controlled now. You're not here in the astral body. This is your physical body that's here in the studio with us this morning. In this particular condition, in this state, you have never seen a flying saucer? Not a UFO now. I'm talking about a saucer landed on the ground that you could have gone up to and touched and possibly gone in and visited.
I have not, as far as I know, been in a saucer to fly in it, I said. But I think I was inside of a saucer when I was in the room with the glass dome.
Well, let me just say
But
this.
I did
I'm
see
sorry.
flying saucers.
What do you mean in the air?
No, not in the air. On the launching platform where they were launched from and where they came back in the Antarctica, where they had a large mothership
Were you there?
inside the ice. I was transported there, but
From
not by
Bridgeport.
saucer. I just got there, and that was it. Everything seemed to go hazy, and
Mhm.
I seemed as if I was floating away from my body, and my body was left on the bed.
Well, you're familiar with many of the terms that are used. Would you say that this was a manifestation of astral projection, or do you feel that your entire body was teleported there due to the knowledge of many things that are labeled psychic phenomena by these three men? Do you think they teleported the entire body of Albert K. Bender there?
No, I do not believe that to be so, because when I seemed to go on these trips, my body seemed to stay there, but I could see myself going away from my body, being transported away. Now, the body seemed to remain behind, but actually I seemed as if I was living the thing out.
Do you, you said, you just made the statement, when you go on these trips, are you still going on trips from time to time?
No. The whole thing stopped on August 18th, 1960. At that time, the metal disc that I had disintegrated. And they told me that when they left our planet for good, that metal disc that I had would disintegrate. And
Was
that
there
would be
anything
a
left of it
signal.
in the process of disintegration?
I had it in a box where I kept papers, valuable papers and things of that nature. And when it disintegrated, it burned up everything I had in the box.
Including the box?
No, it just burned the papers up inside of the box. Wasn't scorched or anything
Were
else.
they valuable papers?
Some of them were, yes.
Was there ashes left?
There was a bit of ashes left, but not much.
How about of the metal? Was there any
Not a
molten,
trace of the metal. Not a trace.
Nothing.
Nothing. They told me that as long as I had that piece of metal in my possession, that I would actually be in their power at any time.
But why would they want to cause this metal to disintegrate to lose the power? I mean, I can see
Because
no
they
reason.
left our planet. They were no longer going to stay here.
Well, let
Their
us-
purpose here was over.
Well, when they leave the planet, they have no way of contacting us again? Or contacting you?
They could come back in years, I would say, but they would have to probably do the
Is
same
there a
thing
problem
again.
in distance?
There didn't seem to be at the time.
I mean, it would
in
seem
the
to me
mode
that
that
if
they
they
traveled in.
If they needed something done on this planet here, it'd be pretty nice to have Bender have the piece of metal handy in the box, because instead of coming all the way back here through some method that they have command of, or rather that they have knowledge of, they would be able to have Bender do things for them right here in this country, or right here in this planet.
Well, the reason for that is they had accomplished their task, and they felt that I wasn't any danger to them at the time, and if they did come back at any time, they certainly could get in touch with me again.
Let me just interrupt here for a moment to remind you this is WOR Radio, your station in New York, 710 on your AM dial and 98.7 on your FM dial, an RKO General Station. And we're talking with Albert K. Bender. He has written a book that we've been waiting for a long, long time. Many things happened since Mr. Bender completed the manuscript, and since the time of publication. It's published by Saucerian Books, and Mr. Barker is a member of that publishing concern. He wrote a book a number of years ago titled They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. But Bender's book is titled Flying Saucers and the Three Men. You've heard Mr. Bender talk for just a few minutes. You've heard him answer a few questions that I had in mind. And let me tell you, this book is far, far out. It's a very, very wild, wild book. Mr. Bender claims it's based on fact. You listen this morning, and you'll learn a lot more about it. I've invited Mr. Barker, Mr. Bender, and James Mosley to be with us. My name, Long John Neville. Jim, you had some questions.
Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Bender a couple of questions. The first one that comes to my mind is this. If you were not afraid in this or let me put it the opposite way. Why was it that you had this particular atmosphere that you created in your room, and that was not frightening to you, whereas these particular experiences were frightening? I would think that you would also have become frightened quite easily a number of times from the actual surroundings that you had in your room and the various things on the walls that you have described to us earlier.
Well, I knew that the things I had on the walls and so on couldn't hurt me. But this other thing was a living object that I saw in the motion picture theater. And the haze that I saw when I came to the room was something that I couldn't create on the walls of my room.
Well, may I ask you this? Do you think that having these things on the walls and living in that type of environment, if I may put it that way, would that in any way make you more susceptible to any type of mental suggestion in regard to the events that you've described?
I wouldn't think so. I would think it would tend to make me immune to it.
In other words, you never had any fear whatsoever when you came home late at night and you went up these creaking stairs that you described, and when you slept, I take it you slept in this particular room with the objects or the luminous paintings on the walls. This never bothered you in any way over the years?
No, it did not.
All right. I wanted to just ask one other thing, and then perhaps I'll turn it back to someone else. My other question was along this line. Why do you suppose, even though you were head of the only large saucer organization in existence at that time, why do you suppose that the space people risked getting in contact with you? In other words, they could have continued their work under the poles without bothering you or letting you know about it in any way. It seems like something extra on their part that they needn't have taken the chance of doing.
That was the strangest thing of all, why they contacted me. I don't know whether I have sort of psychic powers or not, but there has been times I can't seem to do good with this power towards myself. But it seems that if I wish ill on someone, a few months or even weeks after I hear something about this person, they've had bad trouble or something has happened to them. And I often wonder whether or not I have some sort of psychic background that would bring this out. And maybe when this message was sent telepathically to these saucer people, it had some sort of power from me, more so than anyone else, and they picked it up. And they made contact with me.
Well, let's put it this way. You sent out the message in regard to a flying saucer day, so to speak. Now, these space people, in other words, you're saying had more or less no choice but to get in touch with you?
I wouldn't say that. I think they might have been in the vicinity at the time, and they picked this message up. That's
and then they got in touch with you, but in a certain sense rather reluctantly, because they, as I understand from reading the book, Mr. Bender, they were as much afraid of you as you could have been of them, because they did not want to be interrupted in their work under the pole before they had finished whatever this process was that they were doing chemically under there.
No, it might be that I had the idea that the source of the saucers might be at the poles. And I had often thought about that. It came into my mind many times. And I wondered whether or not they could read that in the back of my mind, that I knew where the source of the saucers was. And they thought that I might contact the government, since the government had a lot of people working in the Antarctica at the time. And they might start investigating a bit more and find out something.